The inbox had 1,203 unread messages. The oldest one was 87 years old. Commander Zara Curry stared at the screen. She had not moved in 6 minutes. The analyst behind her, a young man named Elias Park, had stopped breathing somewhere around minute 3. He could feel the silence coming off her like cold off a glacier. "Elias," she said, "when did you find this?" "This morning." The auto-archive filter flagged them as low-priority diplomatic correspondence. The Assembly's domain wasn't in our approved registry. So every message they sent for 87 years went directly into the spam folder. The Secondary Correspondence Archive. The spam folder. Zara scrolled. She did not read. She scanned subject lines the way a person scans a disaster site. Not wanting to look. Unable to stop. Mandatory attendance. Civilizational classification hearing. 2087. Asterisk follow-up. Civilizational classification hearing. Second notice. 2088. Asterisk. Final notice. Civilizational status review. Earth sector. 2089. Invitation. Annual Galactic Assembly Summit. Attendance required for recognized civilizations. 2090. Earth's absence from annual summit. Formal inquiry. 2091. Earth's absence. Second formal inquiry. 2092. She stopped scrolling at 2094. There were still 1,100 messages below it. "Where is Director Chen?" "In a budget meeting." "Pull him out." Elias left. Zara did not watch him go. She was reading the most recent message, dated 4 weeks ago, from something called the Galactic Assembly Civilizational Registry Office. The language was formal and bureaucratic in the way that only institutions with too much power and not enough accountability ever managed. It did not say Earth was primitive. It did not say Earth was small or unimportant. It used cleaner language. It said Earth had been formally classified as a pre-sentient developmental anomaly. It said this classification had been under review for 84 years and had now been finalized, given Earth's continued non-participation in Assembly proceedings. It said Earth was, in the Assembly's official language, a curiosity. Something moved behind Zara's eyes. Not anger, not yet. Something older and quieter, the thing that lives underneath it. She had seen this language before. Not in space. On her grandmother's citizenship application, filed 4 times, rejected 4 times. The language of bureaucratic systems explaining why your existence is noted but your participation is not required. The door opened. Director Marcus Chen came in, jacket half-buttoned. "Commander Curry, I'm in the middle of..." "Sit down, Director." He looked at her face and sat down. She turned the screen toward him. Let him read the subject lines. Watched his face go through several stages of a very specific human experience. The realization that a catastrophic failure had happened very slowly over a very long time, at no single identifiable moment. "This was a system error," Chen said. "We can explain. We can send a response. We're going to do more than explain." Zara's voice was quiet. "They classified us, Director. They ran a hearing about the legal status of 8 billion people. They ran it 84 years ago. Without us. They finalized it 4 weeks ago. And they put us in a category that means we don't get a seat at the table." She paused. "Our invitation to that hearing is in a spam folder." Chen rubbed his face. "What do you want to do?" She had already pulled up a different screen. The United Earth Fleet Registry. Active vessels. Current operational status. The number sat at the top of the page in plain, unremarkable font, the way truly large numbers sometimes present themselves without drama, because they don't need it. 1,247 active warships. Ranging from the small and fast patrol class to the deep space carrier groups that had never once been deployed beyond Earth's own solar defense perimeter. Because Earth had, for the last 50 years, been busy redirecting. Not building toward a war. Building away from one. The distinction mattered. It had always mattered. She looked at the number for a long moment. Then she pulled up a new message addressed to the Galactic Assembly Civilizational Registry Office. She typed 5 lines, read them back, deleted the third line, which had been too sharp, and replaced it with something that would read as polite to anyone who didn't know how polite worked. She showed it to Chen. He read it twice. This is going to get a reaction. Good. A significant reaction. I know. Zara. 1,200 warships is not. It's not a threat, she said. It's a delegation. There's a difference. She hit send. Elias, still standing by the door, cleared his throat. Should I tell the Senate committee you'll be available after lunch? Zara was already pulling up navigation charts. Tell them I'll be available in about 8 weeks. Tell them we have a meeting to attend. She looked at the spam folder one more time. 1,203 messages. 87 years of invitations. 87 years of Earth being somewhere else, doing the hard and ugly work of surviving itself, while the galaxy held meetings about what to call the quiet little planet that never showed up. She closed the folder. They were going to show up now. The thing behind her eyes, older and quieter than anger, settled into something that felt, if she was honest, a lot like purpose. She had her grandmother's jaw and her grandmother's patience. Both had been tested by worse rooms than this. A galactic assembly chamber was just another room. She would bring a folding chair if she had to. The assembly diplomat's name was Thesser, and his bioluminescence shifted through cool blues when he was professionally neutral, which was most of the time. He had been dispatched to Earth as a courtesy, a formality. The assembly had approved his visit under the Observer Protocol, the same protocol used when a Tier 1 civilization wanted to document the development of a pre-classified species without interfering. He had done this work before. 3 pre-sentient worlds. All fascinating in the way small, earnest things were fascinating. He had written good reports. He had felt something like fondness. He had not expected Earth to send a car. Not a diplomatic shuttle. Not a ceremonial escort. A car. Black. Ground-running. Road-bound. Arriving at his landing site on time, driven by a human named Delia Okafor, who shook his hand without hesitation, did not react to his bioluminescence in any way he could read, and asked if he needed the air temperature adjusted. He said he was fine. She said, "Long flight." He had traveled 8 light-years. He said, "Yes." She nodded like this was completely reasonable information to receive before 8 a.m., and merged into traffic. Thesser looked out the window. He had studied Earth from orbital scans. He had expected something consistent with a Tier 2 developmental civilization, organized settlements, primitive transit infrastructure, resource consolidation patterns. What he saw did not look primitive. It looked like a civilization that had made a series of extremely difficult decisions and was still paying the price for some of them, and had made peace with that. Delia drove. She did not explain the city. She did not perform it for him. She existed in it the way people exist in places they have known all their lives. Without self-consciousness. Without distance. He found this more disorienting than anything else. They arrived at the shipyard at 9 o'clock. Admiral General Kofi Sant was waiting at the entrance. He was 64 years old, built like something that had been tested by weather over a long period and had simply declined to change shape. He shook Thesser's hand, steady, entirely without aggression, which was somehow more intimidating than aggression would have been. "Welcome to Dock 7, he said. He did not give a presentation. He simply walked, and Thesser followed. Dock 7 held 53 vessels in various stages of maintenance. Large. Not the largest Thesser had seen. The hegemony of worlds maintained ships that made these look modest. But large. And numerous. And clearly not ceremonial. These were working ships. The humans moving across them moved the way people move when the work is not for performance. Fast. Specific. Completely indifferent to being watched. How long has this dock been operational? Thesser asked. This specific dock since 2024. But the program it's part of, the Unified Fleet Infrastructure Initiative, started in 2048. And how many docks are there? Kofi looked at him with the particular stillness of a person deciding how much of the truth is kind to deliver at once. We can walk through them if you like. They walked through Dock 8, Dock 9, Dock 10, Docks 11 through 19, connected by a transit rail that took 14 minutes to traverse. Dock 20, which held a class of vessel Thesser had no catalog entry for. By the time they reached the observation level above Dock 26, his bioluminescence had cycled through cool blue to pale silver to a color he had not shown in a professional context in many years. He was not cold. He was not performing. The color simply happened. You had wars, he said. The way a scientist states a variable. Constant wars. For millennia. With each other. Yes. He looked at the ships. At the humans on them. At the particular economy of movement that comes from people who have been doing something long enough that the doing is in the body. And then you stopped. Mostly, Kofi said. We redirected. That word sat in the air between them. Redirected. The kind of word that does enormous work quietly. Thesser thought about what redirected meant in the context of a species that had been at war with itself for its entire recorded history. And then, over roughly 50 years, had pointed that energy somewhere else. Not out of peace. Not from sudden enlightenment. From practical necessity. They had looked at each other across the last major ceasefire and done a very human calculation. Killing each other was expensive. Building was cheaper. And if they were going to build, they might as well build something that would last. The Assembly's classification, Thesser said carefully, describes Earth as presentient. A developmental anomaly. Kofi did not look at him. He was watching a repair crew work on the underside of a carrier 3 docks below. I know what the classification says. Does that bother you? He considered the question with thoroughness. The quality of a person who does not give answers they haven't thought about. My grandfather, Kofi said, was born in a village that didn't appear on any official map until 1987. The regional government had a classification system, too. The village was listed as an unregistered rural settlement. Ineligible for infrastructure. Ineligible for school funding. Ineligible for medical supply chains. He paused. He lived there for 70 years. It existed for hundreds of years before that. The map not having it didn't make it not real. It just made the map wrong. Thesser turned back to the ships. The pale silver was still in his skin. He could not make it stop. Your message to the Assembly, he said. Commander Curry's message. It said you were coming to the next session. Yes. The next session is in 4 weeks. At the Outer Rim Assembly Chambers. That is 11 light-years from here. I know. You have had no diplomatic presence. No registered ships. No assembly recognition. You have never attended a session. To arrive with. We'll have our paperwork in order. Kofi said this with the particular serenity of a man who had been working on something for longer than most people understood. Thesser had a question he had been holding since Dock 7. He asked it. How many ships are you bringing? Kofi finally looked at him. The expression on his face was not pride. Not a performance of power. It was something quieter and more durable. The look of a person who has prepared for a very long time for something that is now finally beginning. Enough, he said, to make the point without making a threat. The folding chair was Zara's idea. The assembly chamber had assigned Earth a visitor's observation alcove, a glass-walled box on the upper tier, normally reserved for non-registered entities, journalists, and educational delegations from pre-sentient civilizations. It had no table. It had no communication terminal. It had a padded bench and a water dispenser that did not work. Zara looked at it for approximately 4 seconds. Then she went back to the transport, found a folding chair from the equipment supply, carried it through the main corridor of the Galactic Assembly Chamber, past 247 registered delegations who watched her with expressions ranging from confusion to deep concern, and set it down on the floor of the main chamber. At the table. Not in the glass box. At the table. Her colleagues were Fleet Legal Counsel Harriet Doyle and Cultural Liaison Officer Nathan Voss. Harriet watched Zara place the chair and said nothing. Then she opened her briefcase, removed a small placard, and set it in front of the chair. It read, Earth. She had made it on the flight over. Card stock. Black marker. Not laminated. Not printed. Made by hand because there had not been time to do it any other way. Nathan looked at them both. He was 36 and had spent 9 years studying assembly diplomatic protocol, all 14 recognized languages, all 61 formal procedures for session entry. He had prepared extensively. He sat down in the chair next to Zara and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The assembly chair was named Velis. Ancient in the way that ancient things can sometimes be, not old in the sense of worn, but old in the sense of having simply been continuous for a very long time. His species registered stress as a slow color shift in their outer membrane. He did not begin to shift immediately. He was, to his credit, a professional. The floor recognizes, he said in Galactic Standard, that there appear to be individuals seated at the primary delegate table who are not on the session registry. Commander Zara Kuri, United Earth Fleet, Earth Diplomatic Corps. We received your invitation. A pause. Earth does not have a registered seat at this table. Earth has a chair, Zara said. We brought it. Across the chamber, 247 delegations were doing what delegations do when something unprecedented happens in a room that has not had anything unprecedented happen in a very long time. They were reacting. The reactions were varied. Several species reacted in colors. Several in sound frequencies. Several simply sat very still. Thesser was seated in the Valoran delegation box on the mid-tier. His bioluminescence was pale silver. It had been pale silver since he left Earth. Velis consulted something off-screen. Earth's current classification under Galactic Registry Protocol, Section 7, is Presentient Developmental Anomaly. Class C. Under this classification, Earth representatives are entitled to observation access only. Participation in primary chamber proceedings is not. Zara placed a document on the table. Printed. Bound. 1,847 pages. She placed it without ceremony, the way you place a thing when you want the thing to speak for itself. Earth's formal response to the presentient classification, she said. Including a full review of the evidentiary basis for the original 2087 hearing, the procedural irregularities of a hearing conducted without the subject civilization's knowledge or participation, and Earth's annotated commentary on every galactic treaty signed in the last 87 years that affected Earth's solar system without Earth's consent. A longer pause. That document is 1,847 pages, Velis said. Yes. The chamber was not quiet. Quiet was the absence of sound. What the chamber had was the presence of many different kinds of sound happening simultaneously on different frequencies. The conversational equivalent of a building settling after a significant impact. Velis set down his materials. Something about his posture shifted, not dramatically, just a degree. The way a professional shifts when they have accepted that the next several hours are not going to resemble what they planned. Commander Kuri. Earth's Fleet Registry, as of this morning's update from our monitoring systems, shows over 1,200 active vessels currently positioned at the outer edge of the system's approach corridor. Yes. Is this a military posture? Zara considered the question the way her grandmother had considered questions from people who held forms that could say yes or no to her future. With patience. With care. With a very specific type of restraint that is not weakness but is the decision made consciously not to spend all your cards at once. We were invited to a meeting, she said. We wanted to be prepared. The chamber noise shifted register. A Cracian delegate was speaking rapidly to his aide. The assembly chair, Velis, was very slowly beginning to shift color, a faint amber creeping across his membrane. A Branari delegate, whose species registered extreme emotion as a sudden expansion of their outer tissue, was notably, unmistakably larger than they had been 2 minutes ago. But the humans at the table were not doing any of this. Harriet had opened her briefcase and removed a stylus and was taking notes. Nathan had produced a thermos of coffee from somewhere and poured a cup. Zara sat with both hands on the table, looking at the assembly chair with a particular expression she had inherited from her grandmother, the look of a person who has already decided they are not leaving. Velis called a 20-minute recess for procedural review. Zara poured herself water from the dispenser marked non-functional. She pressed the button. It worked fine. She drank it. It tasted terrible. She had expected that. Outside, in the dark and cold of deep space, 1,247 ships held perfectly still. They had been holding still for a very long time. Not patience. Purpose. The same thing that keeps a held breath still, not absence of power, but presence of it. Waiting. Thesser did not sleep after the session. He sat in his delegation quarters with the lights at half, his terminal open, thinking in color the way his species thinks when something has not yet resolved into language. His natural state was cool blue, steady, professional. He had been cycling through silver for days and failing to hold the blue. Silver, in his species, meant something between awe and fear. Not fear of a threat. The fear of something true that is larger than your current vocabulary. He opened a new document. Stared at the header. Typed, Earth Civilizational Classification Assessment. Deleted it. Typed, Emergency Status Review. Deleted that too. He sat back and thought about what he had actually seen. In the shipyards, the product of 50 years of redirected violence. That was the right word. Kofi had handed it to him. Redirected. Not converted. Not reformed. The same energy, pointed somewhere else. In the chamber, 3 humans at a table they had not been invited to, with a folding chair and a handwritten placard. Not performing confidence. Not managing their bodies the way every other species in that room was managing theirs. Controlling colors, suppressing sounds, holding expansions. They had simply been calm. Thesser had studied xenobiology for 14 years. He knew what unmanaged calm looked like. It looked like the Ardini, whose nervous systems generated almost no stress hormones, placid and lovely, entirely without ambition. It looked like the Marath, who processed anxiety so slowly that crisis registered as mild interest. Human calm did not look like either of those things. Human calm looked like a structure that had been built over time and was holding its shape under load. He tried to explain this in a report. The words did not come. He wrote 6 pages and felt, reading them back, that he had described the outside of a building he had never entered. The Assembly's classification system had 4 primary tiers. Presentient, developing, peer, elder. Earth did not fit any of them. Presentient required no unified governance. Earth had that. Developing required demonstrated stability over 50 consecutive years. Earth's stability was complicated, but it had continued. Peer required a diplomatic history Earth had never been given the chance to build. And the fleet. Peer required 60 recognized warships. Earth had 1,247. This was the number he kept returning to. Not because it was frightening. Because of what it meant about the classification system. The Assembly's framework assumed civilizations developed linearly, that military capacity and diplomatic maturity grew in proportion. Earth had broken that assumption. Not through aggression or genius. By being for most of its history at war with itself. When the wars ended, the capacity didn't disappear. It redirected. He thought about the ship names. Endurance. Resolute. Long Road. Patience. In his language, calm was a shade of blue. In Earth's language, it was a list of things that had refused to stop. He opened the document again. Wrote for 2 hours. When he finished, it was not a classification recommendation. It was a confession. The tools he had been given to understand civilizations were not adequate to understand this one. He recommended the Assembly suspend its standard classification framework for Earth entirely. Not assign a new category. Simply acknowledge that Earth did not fit. He marked it priority urgent. Sent it. Then he sat back. The blue returned slowly, imperfectly, working against the silver that kept breaking through. Outside, the ships were still. He thought about the placard. Card stock. Black marker. Earth. He had carried official diplomatic credentials for 22 years, embossed with the Assembly's primary registry mark, backed by 4,000 years of continuous civilizational recognition. He had watched a human woman put a handwritten placard on a table and sit down in a folding chair. He had watched the handwritten placard hold. The vote did not go quickly. Nothing in the Galactic Assembly ever went quickly. It was an institution built by species with lifespans and attention spans that varied by several orders of magnitude. Velis had been managing it for 80 years. But he had never managed a session with 1,247 ships in the approach corridor. Zara sat at the folding chair and watched the chamber work. She did not perform impatience. She felt it, The specific, familiar impatience she got in rooms where power moved slowly because the people with power had the luxury of slow. She recognized it and set it aside. Harriet was monitoring the procedural track, flagging irregularities in the original 2087 classification hearing. She had noted that the hearing had been conducted under a provision requiring notification to the subject civilization, and that notification had been filed but never confirmed as received. She had filed a formal appeal. Nathan was managing communications, handling real-time queries from delegations ranging from genuinely curious to nakedly strategic. The Cretan delegation signaled hostility first. Their lead delegate submitted a motion to designate Earth a threat civilization, pending military review. Velis tabled it for procedural reasons. Zara understood that tabling was not defeating. The motion would return. The session broke for the midday interval. Zara stayed at the table, ate a nutrition bar, drank the bad water, read the 1,847-page document, not because she didn't know what was in it, but because there was something useful about being seen to read your own materials in a room full of people expecting you to perform confidence instead. Confidence was not the point. Preparation was. The session resumed. 3 more delegations submitted written questions. Harriet drafted responses. Nathan passed them to Zara. She reviewed, adjusted 2 phrasings, returned them. Then Velis reached the point everyone had been navigating toward. The classification vote. Under Assembly Protocol, a civilization's classification could be challenged by a 2/3 majority. Earth had submitted a formal challenge. The categories were the 4 standard ones. And then, quietly, a 5th option appeared on the session record. Thesser had submitted it in his overnight report. Velis had allowed it onto the ballot. Undetermined, pending further assessment. It had been used twice in Assembly history. Both times for civilizations whose status was actively disputed. Never for a civilization that showed up with over 1,000 warships. Never for a civilization no one could quite name. The vote opened. Zara watched the board. Presentient. Developing. Peer. Undetermined. The votes accumulated slowly. No clear majority. The numbers spread across categories in a pattern that looked less like an election and more like a record of a room that did not agree. Aboard the flagship 6 light minutes away, Admiral General Kofi Sant watched the same board. His comms officer, a young woman named Lydia Frost, turned from her station. "Sir, the threat civilization motion is still on the table." "I know. Should we move the fleet even further back to signal non-aggression?" Kofi was quiet. More votes coming in. No majority. "We're not here to threaten anyone." "Sir, with respect, we already are." He looked at the board. "That's different. Being a threat and threatening are not the same action. One is a condition. The other is a choice." The vote closed. No majority in any category. Presentient, 41 votes. Developing, 38. Peer, 59. Undetermined, 101. Not a 2/3 majority. Earth's challenge was upheld by technical default. You could not maintain a classification that had failed to achieve majority support. Earth was, at this moment, constitutionally unclassified. In 247 sessions of Assembly history, this had never happened. Velis looked at the results board. His membrane had shifted to a deep amber. He looked at the Earth delegation, at the folding chair, at the handwritten placard. "Commander Curry, in light of the vote's outcome, what does Earth want from this body?" The chamber went quiet. The many-frequency kind of quiet that is actually many sounds, all choosing simultaneously to wait. Zara looked at the placard. Card stock. Black marker. She had made it herself because there had not been time to do it any other way. She thought about the spam folder, 1,203 messages, 87 years of invitations to a meeting that was about to begin. She thought about her grandmother's citizenship application, the careful formal language explaining why your presence is noted but your participation is not required. She stood up. Not for drama. Some things are said standing. A real seat at this table. Voting rights. Treaty protections. Formal recognition under Galactic law. She looked at Velis directly. And someone rewrites the charter. The classification system you are using was designed for a galaxy that did not include us. It needs to be updated." She sat back down, picked up her water, drank it. Still terrible. Outside, 1,247 ships held their position. They had been still for 19 hours. They were not impatient. They were what they had always been, a product of everything Earth had survived to build. Waiting with a particular quality of something that has been ready for a long time and is not surprised to finally be here. Velis called a second recess. The chamber broke apart into urgent conversations. The business of a galaxy realizing that its map was wrong had begun. Zara stayed at the table. She straightened the placard one more time. Earth. The white space around it was not empty. It was the pause before the next sentence. The specific beat that belongs to things that have waited long enough and are now finally beginning to be heard. She was her grandmother's granddaughter. She had her grandmother's jaw and her grandmother's patience. Neither had ever left a table before the work was done. The session would resume. The motion would return. The galaxy would learn to make room. She poured more water. It was still terrible. She drank it anyway. The second vote took 3 days. Not because the outcome was uncertain, because the galaxy needed time to admit what it already knew. When the numbers finally appeared on the board, they were not close. Undetermined status, 189 votes. Reclassification to peer, 58. Presentient, 0. Earth was no longer unclassified. Earth was something new. The Assembly would spend the next 2 years drafting a 5th category. They would call it Continuum Civilization, a species that does not develop in straight lines, that carries its history as structure rather than scar, that has learned to redirect its own fire towards something worth building. Zara Curry did not stay for the charter rewrite. She had done what she came to do. The folding chair went back to the transport. The placard, cardstock, black marker, slightly smudged, went into her jacket pocket. She would keep it for the rest of her life. The fleet returned to Earth. Not in triumph. In quiet completion. They had been seen. They had been heard. Now there was work to do. Admiral General Kofi Sant retired 6 months later. At his farewell ceremony, someone asked him what he thought the galaxy had learned from Earth. He thought about it for a moment. That being late to a meeting doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It just means you were busy surviving. Thesser's report became required reading at the Assembly's Diplomatic Academy. It was not a classification. It was not a recommendation. It was, as he had intended, a confession. The first line read, "We do not have a word for what Earth is. That is not Earth's failure. It is ours." He was promoted. He did not want the promotion. He took it anyway, because he had learned something about showing up. The spam folder was archived. The 1,203 messages, 87 years of invitations, were entered into the official record. A note was attached. Earth acknowledges receipt. Response time, 87 years. Delegation size, 1,247 ships. Outcome, table expanded. Harriet Doyle drafted the final version of the Charter Amendment. It passed unanimously. Nathan Voss became Earth's first permanent representative to the Assembly. He kept a thermos of coffee at his station at all times. No one commented on it. By then, everyone understood. Zara visited her grandmother's grave the week after the vote. She placed the placard on the stone, cardstock, black marker, slightly smudged from being carried across the galaxy and back. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The woman buried there had been denied citizenship 4 times. Her granddaughter had just secured recognition for 8 billion people. The galaxy did not change overnight. Empires do not unlearn fear quickly. But the map was different now. Earth was on it. Not as a curiosity. Not as a developmental anomaly. As a fact. The fleet was downsized over the following decade. Not because Earth no longer needed it. Because Earth had learned that the point of building something is not to keep it forever. The point is to build enough that you can afford to let some of it go. The ships were decommissioned slowly, with ceremony. Each one's name was read aloud. Each one's history was spoken. Endurance. Resolute. Long road. patience. The names of things that had refused to stop. Zara attended the last decommissioning. She was 73 years old, retired, living in a small house by the sea. She watched the final carrier power down its engines and thought about the spam folder. About the folding chair. About the placard in her pocket that she had never laminated, because laminating would have missed the point. She thought about her grandmother. About the forms. About the careful formal language explaining why your presence is noted but your participation is not required. She thought about how long it had taken to change that language, and how many people had worked, in large ways and small, to make the change possible. She walked home along the shore. The stars were coming out. They looked the same as they always had. That was fine. They did not need to change. The galaxy had changed enough. She reached her door, paused, looked up at the sky one more time. Somewhere out there, in a chamber she would never see again, a session was probably still in progress. Delegations were speaking. Votes were being cast. The machinery of governance was turning. She smiled. Not because she was proud. Because she was tired in the way that comes after work completed, the good tired, the earned tired. She went inside, made tea, sat by the window, watched the stars. The placard was on her mantel now. Card stock. Black marker. Fading slightly. Earth. She had brought a folding chair to the most powerful room in the galaxy because no one had saved her a seat. She had sat down. She had not left until the work was done. That was not a threat. That was a promise. The tea was warm. The stars were bright. The map was wrong for a very long time, and then it wasn't. She finished her tea. Went to bed. Slept better than she had in 87 years. Outside, the galaxy kept turning. But somewhere in the dark, 1,000 ships were finally at rest. They had done what they came to do. They had been seen. They had been heard. Now they were home.